Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. My name's Greg Chen. I work at the Ultra Poor Graduation Initiative as part of BRAC. I'm stepping in for Shamran Abed, the Executive Director of BRAC International, who sends his regrets. He unfortunately fell under the weather yesterday on his way back from the UK back to Bangladesh. We really want to welcome everyone, and I'm just going to say a few words of welcome as we get going before turning it over to our moderator. And it's important to be reminded why we're here today. It's an important discussion about applying evidence in the eradication of extreme poverty. And each of the people who are here today bring a wealth of expertise and knowledge about poverty eradication and women's economic empowerment. And we look forward to hearing from our panelists and from all of you in the chat function. So why are we here today? Before COVID, Asia had made enormous progress in the past 30 years in combating poverty. As one example, Bangladesh had reduced the rates of extreme poverty from 43% in 1991 to just a little over 10% just before the pandemic hit. Across Asia, economic growth, social protection programs, and investments in human capital have led to enormous progress across the Asian region. But we also know, even before COVID hit, that the gains we were making were fragile and incomplete. Many remain vulnerable to shocks and stresses. And in some cases, social protection still was unable to reach and serve the most vulnerable. The new threats of COVID and climate change are only adding to the policy challenges. And so that's the challenge, I think, that brings us here today, which is how do we redouble our efforts to think about using evidence-based solutions to drive more durable gains that can address the challenges we even had before the onset of the pandemic and climate change. We were at BRAC inspired to pull this together because 2022 is the year where we turn 50, and we've long been committed to fighting inequality and poverty alongside our partners at the local, regional, and global levels. And as part of this, one of our approaches, the graduation approach, has historically reached more than 2.1 million households in Bangladesh. And the program that I lead outside Bangladesh is committed to scaling these across the globe. So we felt like this was an important moment to redouble our efforts and focus on extreme poverty. So with that, I want to introduce our esteemed partner, Wendy Walker, who's the chief of the Social Development Thematic Group at the Asian Development Bank, who will be moderating today's session. Wendy has led multi-sector teams in designing and implementing complex programs and worked across a whole range of sectors from urban development, transport, education, and of course, social protection. And she will introduce our panelists momentarily. The panelists will address opportunities and challenges of building more inclusive and resilient systems that contribute to long-lasting poverty and reduction in poverty reduction and women's economic empowerment. We welcome the other attendees to share their insights and experiences and questions. And this is one of several events we plan to have over the course of this year, to refocus our efforts on this important topic. So with that, I welcome everyone, and I turn it over to Wendy and thank her for her moderation.
Great, thanks very much, Greg. And it's a real pleasure to be here joining you for this 50th anniversary, BRAC 50th anniversary regional dialogue program, the one for Asia and Pacific. I'd like to say hello to everybody who's connected today and thank you for joining. At this session, we are joined by a very exciting group of panelists who have a wealth of knowledge and expertise. And together, they're going to discuss evidence-based poverty eradication programs that promote sustainable, inclusive, and long-term growth, recovery, and resilience. But before we get started, I'd like to encourage everybody who's connected today, all the attendees, to contribute to this conversation by sharing your insights and questions via the chat box located at the bottom of the screen. The team here will work to address your questions in real time as much as possible. But for those that require more of a collaborative response, maybe a few inputs from the different speakers, we're going to collect the questions, develop the full responses, and then share these in a document along with the recording of the event to everybody who signed up in the next couple of weeks. Please feel free to jump in the chat box at any time, and let's make that an ongoing dialogue also parallel. So now let's turn to some quick introductions and then jump into the heart of the dialogue, because I think it's going to really be a very interesting discussion today. The first speaker I'll introduce is Dr. Stephanie Levy. She's a guest lecturer at the London School of Economics, Department of International Development. Her research in Africa and Southeast Asia focuses on local economic impact of social protection, including cash transfers and graduation packages, the complementarity between rural development policies and social transfers, and the impact of financial shocks and stresses on household behavior. Dr. Imran Matan is the executive director of the BRAC Institute of Governance and Development, which is a research and postgraduate education institute at BRAC University. It focuses on generating high quality evidence and insights based on field research on governance and development challenges and interventions. Dr. Karen Schelsig, who's a colleague of mine at Asian Development Bank, was going to join us this evening and share her experience on the cash transfer program in the Philippines, but unfortunately she won't be able to join us tonight. Palash Kantidas is the director of BRAC Ultra Poor Graduation Program in Bangladesh. He's a very seasoned development professional with solid and diversified field experience in the areas of sustainable and inclusive development, international relations, gender equality and diversity, and general management in the nonprofit sector. I'm also very pleased to welcome Pamaliki, who is the Director of Poverty Alleviation and Community Empowerment at the Ministry of National Development Planning with the government of Indonesia. Prior to this position, he has worked in various capacities in poverty alleviation and economic acceleration, and conducted research in poverty among the elderly and in the areas of financial development and sustainability. And finally, we're very happy to have tonight Swamin Wagle, who is the Chief Economic Advisor at the United Nations Development Program's Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific, based in New York. He leads the work on strategy, policy, and partnerships covering 36 countries. And prior to his current position, Dr. Wagle worked as senior economist at the World Bank in Washington and UNDP offices in Hanoi, Colombo, and New York. So that's the full range of speakers today. You can see that we have a very wide range of academics, researchers, policymakers, practitioners. And with that very diverse and rich group, I want to now, an impressive set of introductions. Let's now start the dialogue. I am going to pose a round of questions to each panelist as at the start, and to make sure that we can hear from everyone, please try hard to stick to the 5 to 7 minutes for your response, so that we have a little bit of time for taking in the audience questions and maybe a second round as well. So let me first turn to you, Stephanie, with two parts of a question. Drawing on the work you have been doing in Cambodia and elsewhere, can you provide an illustration of how data-driven approaches have been used to expand and make more inclusive existing programs so that they're better able to reach and meet the multidimensional long-term needs of people living in extreme poverty? Over to you, Stephanie. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Wendy. Thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to join this really important discussion. Even though it's 3 a.m. here in London, I'm really thrilled to be with you all. And I thought that one way to answer your question, Wendy, will be to actually present some research that I've been conducting for UNDP and for the government of Cambodia this past year's on graduation program. I would like to very briefly explain what we did and what we found and why this might be of interest to this audience, why the policy lessons might be substantial. So our research question initially was what could be the potential macroeconomic impact of graduation packages if they were integrated into the national social protection framework in Cambodia. So if they scaled up to reach those living in extreme poverty, what will be the impact on growth? So growth, of course, is not the aim of social protection, but it is a question of importance to policymakers. And in fact, in Cambodia, growth has been at the core of government priorities over the past 15 years. And quite successfully so, in fact, because Cambodia has been one of the fastest growing economy in the world over that period of time. So we wanted to look at the macroeconomic impact, which is a question that hasn't been answered very largely in the literature so far. And we wanted to look at the comparative advantages of graduation compared to more conventional cash transfer interventions. We wanted to look at trade-offs. We wanted to look at complementarity with other rural development programs, all the things that are probably of interest to a lot in this audience. And one thing also that we wanted to do, which you cannot do with RCTs, for example, is to look at the impact on the whole of the country income distribution. Of course, that's quite an ambitious set of questions. And I would like to explain what we did to try and answer them. So we adopted a general equilibrium approach. We used the general equilibrium model and a range of micro simulations that we designed specifically to answer those questions. So the aim was to trace the direct and the indirect impact on the local economy. So we wanted to look not just at participants, but also at the non-participants. And because we were interested in the scaling up questions, then we wanted to trace this impact all the way to wider economic growth. So for those of you not familiar with this type of model, general equilibrium models are extensively used by almost every country around the world has some form of general equilibrium model to do policy planning. It gives a snapshot of the economy at a given point in time. It's a very detailed representation of the structure of the economy. So in the case of Cambodia, we modified this model and the model that are usually used by IFPRI or the World Bank, and we developed a very detailed household structure within it, coupled with micro simulations. So the paper explained that really well. But what is important, and I will encourage you to look at those papers. But what was really important here is that we worked in partnership with the government all the way from the design of the project up until the end of it. So what did we find? We found three main things that I think are really very important. We found, number one, that graduation intervention could simultaneously stimulate supply and demand in the local economy. And through the effect on productivity, on market, on trade even, they create local synergies and multiplier effects that foster inclusive economic growth processes. I think that was a really remarkable result that I didn't expect to find to this level, that the government was really interested to look at and to take into consideration. Number two, we look at cost, we look at the fiscal space, and we found that at the same level of public spending, so for the exact same budget, we identify multiple benefits of graduation packages relative to conventional safety net programs. So we found a stronger impact on income generation and a stronger participation of the poor to the local economy. So stronger social economic impacts, stronger inclusion, stronger economic inclusion, compared to more conventional forms of social protections. So more benefits, but also they were less associated with risks on prices, for example, which is a question that is sometimes asked. We can see that with COVID, prices are increasing and a lot of cash has been injected in the economies where we live. Well, in the case of graduation, we actually find that they were not only no price effect, but even the prices of essential goods diminished. The third result was that both poverty and economic growth impact were likely to last beyond the program implementation period. And the catalytic effect of productive assets and professional skills persist after the program have ended. And this effect are over and above the impact of cash transfer only. So if you look at a longer time period, this result was really striking for us. So the macroeconomic results that we found confirm the micro findings from my LSE colleagues and for Esther Duflo team at GPAL. And the reason I wanted to talk to you today was precisely because the micro and from what we see, the macro findings really confirm this kind of very impressive results. Now, I've done this kind of exercises for many years to look at the impact of cash transfer, but I have never obtained such results, the results so large and so compelling. And in fact, it was so compelling that the government of Cambodia is now working with, we now working with the government of Cambodia to develop and implement now a randomized control trial to complement this kind of study with a more microeconomic one, and we're looking at household behavior in particular. And so just to conclude, I don't know if I've used all my time already, maybe I have. I just wanted to make a very, very brief conclusion, which is that there will always be a need for cash transfers, always. There is no country in the world where there isn't a need for cash transfers, where the household cannot engage in productive activities, whether you want to protect household from financial shocks and stresses. But graduation has something unique to offer to many. So it's not instead, it's something really unique and extremely valuable. I also found something else that was unique in addition to the research result that we got, is that I found a unique political support for this kind of policies, for policies that support asset accumulation and transfer of skills to the poor. And in Cambodia, this was really particularly striking. So I saw a substantial political appeal for enabling policies that really made me hopeful. Now, I don't know the extent to which those results are specific to Cambodia because of its poverty profile, because of specific constraints that the Cambodian living in poverty face, because of the structure of its economy. I don't know. And I wonder, would the result be as convincing elsewhere? Will they be even more convincing in contexts where growth hasn't been so fast? I don't know, but I really hope that I will be able to join the discussion next time with even more evidence pointing towards this direction that I believe are illustrative of what kind of evidence that researcher can bring to the table, and how we can actually engage in the policy dialogue by providing the kind of evidence that policymakers need in order to take the decisions that they have to make and use sometimes scarce resource that they have. So thank you very much. I hope I wasn't too long, but thank you very much.
No, that was perfect. Thank you, and very high energy for 3 a.m. But what an exciting example to kick us off with on really a data-driven evidence demonstrating the catalytic effects and also very broad impacts. And what an exciting piece of research that you've done. Wonder where you will be looking to next. For anybody interested, I think that we'll be posting the link to your paper and maybe to a couple of papers in the chat. Thank you very much for that first kickoff, Stephanie. Now let me turn to Imran, and I want to ask, what have we learned about such programs regarding their effectiveness in reaching and in meeting the multidimensional and long-term needs of people living in extreme poverty? Over to you, Imran.
Thank you. Thank you. I think, Stephanie provided a kind of a really sharp and focused example. Let me just, I think I'll go for breadth rather than anything very specific, just to sort of paint the evidence canvas that we sort of currently have, that is emerging in front of us and what some of the gaps are. But perhaps before I start that, just wanted to, I think identifying, you talked about identifying, and targeting, I think, is sort of something that we need to bring back into the whole evidence agenda much more clearly and much more robustly than we have actually done. I think targeting innovations and targeting not only poverty, but also targeting poverty in a more dynamic way, not only in a listing sense, but in a more agile sense, and targeting needs, I think, is really important. And I think it would be really good to get really serious evidence, actors involved in doing research on targeting. I think especially after the COVID context, I think it's become, one of the biggest challenge has been the whole targeting exercise. And I think that's somewhere. And I think the Ultra graduation program has a lot to offer in terms of how targeting is actually done, but it also needs to kind of critically look at itself and figure out more innovations in this whole space. So this is a plea, I think targeting, bringing that into the evidence space. Now, in terms of the overall, if you look at the evidence canvas, where we have kind of emerging filling up of colors and where the gaps are. I think one way to think about it is, in terms of comprehensiveness or complexity of different types of range of interventions, if you like. And there, I think you have got the least comprehensive, or in some ways the simplest to implement, which is just cash transfer. And then you've got some cash plus, and then graduation, full model. And then one may even think about graduation plus models. And I think, one may think of that in terms of its comprehensiveness or complexity of how you actually sort of operate that. And then another dimension to think is in terms of, how much do these impacts actually stick? So short term and long term, right? So I think if one, creates that type of a matrix of thinking about the evidence base, then, it's sort of, what is emerging is, cash only. The simpler the program, the short-term effects seem to be actually higher, in terms of even impact or cost benefit. But in terms of lasting, in terms of its longer-term effect, we don't really see that, right? So I think that's sort of one general conclusion we basically get. Now, I think that's something that's really important. So if we're interested in longer-term impact, then I think we have to absorb some level of complexity of operation, some level of comprehensiveness of the model. And that basically, and exact comprehensiveness will depend on the context and, what we're really trying to do and the nature of the local economy and so on and so forth. But I think that's a general conclusion, right? So I think the cash plus then becomes, and the innovations within the cash plus becomes a very live domain of inquiry, right? In terms of its, within that, within the context and what type of operational complexity we can actually absorb, it will depend on the nature of the capability of the sort of, social protection, system, and so on and so forth, right? So I think that's sort of one large type of, evidence that we're getting. The other is, the long-term effects are really, we have like two big studies, I think, very good studies on this. One is recently done on the 10-year long impact, looking at 10-year long cohort by Uvijit Banerjee and others, just sort of came out. And the other one is by Oriana Robin, along with us at BIGD that we have been involved in. Now, both of this basically clearly show that the impact sustain and it actually grows over time, right? And I think that really is very, very important in terms of the graduation program. And I think that's something I think Stephanie also sort of alluded to. But I think the mechanisms through which this basically this impact sustain in case of, I mean, it's sort of primarily, you know, kind of getting to more lucrative forms of wage employment. It's occupational shift that's basically happening, right? From casual wage labor to more secure forms of self-employment and other more lucrative forms of wage labor, be it through migration or through other forms of asset accumulation or diversification. That's basically happening, right? So that's the kind of pattern that we basically see. Now, you know, so this is creating a new trajectory of occupational transition and mobility, but this is most likely not going to be enough for the kind of intergenerational transformation that we may basically need. And that's exactly the kind of area that we need to kind of think about. The intergenerational transformation, the intergenerational graduation then becomes an important area to basically explore. So that's with respect to, you know, kind of, I think, you know, the overall, you know, economic kind of theory behind the sort of the impact dynamics or the mechanisms that we currently see. I think another big area is the variation that we basically see in the impact of graduation program, right? And the micro studies show a huge amount of variation, be it, you know, kind of within a same program, we basically see a lot of variation. On average, it works, but there's a lot of variation. And across different contexts, we see a lot of variation. So I think studies on understanding these variations better and figuring out how we can reduce these variations and what are the sources of this variation so we can reduce them. And whatever innovations is required to reduce this variation is really, really important. Because, you know, there's a recent study that we were part of along with Oriana. We basically looked at, you know, it's following on from the long-term ultra-poor graduation cohort that we have. We sort of did, you know, looked at the COVID effect. We couldn't do the control group because it's been kind of, you know, we have basically let the control go because that was the agreement, you know, from an ethics point of view. But what we see is within the treatment group, we see that those who actually managed to cross the threshold before COVID managed to stay, you know, were much more resilient than those who had not been able to cross the threshold. So I think so this is all about, you know, and then about a third of the people could not cross the overall threshold. So how do we reduce that variation of impact? And I think one of the biggest driver there is the big push. You know, what is how big the push is determines, you know, to what extent, you know, people can actually you know, kind of move out of the sort of poverty trap. So I think, and there may be other kind of, how do you design this big push is also important. So it's not only the size of the big push, but also the design of the big push. So overall, reducing the variability that we see in terms of the overall effect is really, really important to address. Finally, I think Stephanie talked a lot about this. I think the general equilibrium effects are going to be the most important. I mean, that's where we know the least. And that's really important to convince the government. Because I think ultimately governments get really convinced, and we have colleagues from the government here, gets really convinced when you have the general equilibrium effects. You know, so the household level micro studies on their own doesn't really shift the policy conversation. The policy conversation gets shifted with the macro effects and the distributional impacts and the kind of, you know, the kind of overall effect on the local economy and the sort of general growth. So I think that we need many more studies of the type that Stephanie is doing. And, you know, just writing to her on sort of chat box. I'd love to talk to her and then, you know, kind of figure out, do similar kind of studies in the context of, you know, I think Bangladesh would be a fantastic country with, you know, BRAC's ultra-poor graduation going on for the last, you know, 20 years and with varying intensity in different local geographies. I think we can do a richer modeling because we have got a long historical data set to be able to really, you know, kind of look at this macroeconomic effects and general equilibrium and spillover effects at scale. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Imran. Also a really fascinating set of comments and a fantastic overview of the evidence canvas to date and also the evidence agenda going forward and the kinds of impacts that evidence base is having on changing and shifting programs and convincing governments to take certain policy responses or not. So very good to see the connection between you and Stephanie also emerging, and maybe something wonderful will happen next in Bangladesh. I'd like to take a second here now to pause for a second, and let's take a poll. We'll take a minute to take this poll. It should be showing up on your screen. And if you can please enter your responses, and then we will quickly provide the results. The poll is about the greatest barrier. So what is the greatest barrier to strengthening poverty eradication programs and policies so they better reach people furthest behind? Please choose up to 3 options. You can just click on the 3 different options. First one is inefficient allocation and utilization of resources. Second is lack of data. Third is inefficient service delivery. Fourth is transitions in government. Fifth is poor targeting. And sixth is lack of coordination among stakeholders, including government. So we'll wait here just another minute or so. Everything's moving around quite a bit. Almost there, still getting some results. Okay, I think we're just about done. Shall we close the poll? Yeah, now we can share the results with you. Can everybody see? Looks like 54% say that inefficient allocation and utilization of resources. Next highest is poor targeting. And the third, but very close to another one, is inefficient service delivery. The next one closest to that is lack of coordination among stakeholders, including government. So interesting set of priorities there, or major barriers. Thank you for participating in the poll and providing your quick reflections. So let me now turn to Palash. Hope everybody was able to see that on the screen. Palash, based on the extensive experience in Bangladesh of supporting existing programs to make them more inclusive and expansive to reach and meet the long-term needs of people living in extreme poverty, what have we learned and what kinds of changes are needed to further advance those efforts?
Thanks, Wendy. And thank you so much, Imran Bhai and Stephanie, to set the ground in relation to graduation approach and also programs in Bangladesh, ultra-pro graduation program targeting poverty reduction. Well, the lessons what you have learned and what I think we have been learning continuously last, say, 20 years since the MDGP era started, we have been asking, like, I'll try to respond under 4 bullet points. We have been asking, the first one is that we have been asking ourselves, can we tackle both extreme poverty and inequality? So over a period of time, what we are seeing is that, like, as Stephanie mentioned, and also Imran Bhai highlighted that through graduation approach, yes, we are, say, tackling that extreme poverty, but more and more we are seeing in a country like Bangladesh and also in other countries, I'm sure in Cambodia, in other countries, we are seeing like widening inequality. Now, when you put these 2 things together, extreme poverty and inequality, that what would be the kind of like programmatic response there? And that's I think the new area we all need to work on. And based on our experiences, it says that the social protection and the, say, directly targeting poverty reduction kind of program, that would work well. But considering the current situations, all this COVID and all these changes, we need perhaps a new set of social protection systems and social safety net programs to tackle both extreme poverty and inequality. I mean, that's directly linked with what Stephanie mentioned. The income distribution, the wealth distribution is not at all being addressed properly, whereas that all the policies and the programs are really to some extent generating wealth at various levels. So in order to get these 2 issues together, I think for a country like Bangladesh, we do need more say new kind of social protection mechanisms and systems in place linked directly with the program. My second point is linked to the first, but the second point again, coming to the whole issues, all these developing countries like Bangladesh, we all are talking about, say, let's have inclusive growth. And we started the whole process, like other countries said 8, 10, 15 years back. Now the question comes here after having, say, so much like strong evidences from, say, ultra-poor graduation program that we are addressing extreme poverty, but whether the graduation is contributing to inclusive growth or not. And that is one of the key questions I think we all development practitioners, we need to respond to. I mean, from Stephanie's studies, it says that yes, I mean, to some extent, because of demand and supply, as Stephanie mentioned, those are being generated and navigated in such a way that we're addressing inclusive growth and graduation approach may contribute there. But the moment we bring in leaving no one behind principle there, here comes the main question. All the programs, what we are having right now, be it social safety net kind of approach, cash plus or cash plus, or extreme poverty related programs, are we addressing that really the leaving one behind agenda or not? For instance, if we come from UPG experience, we try to reach all the persons who are differently able, people with disabilities, but with all of our resources, we could reach only 1.5% of all of our UPG participants. And the need is much more than that. The second is that within that, the climate change related issues, that since the climate change is affecting the overall poverty situations and the people from vulnerable groups and different communities and other groups, are we addressing, are we really designing program to reach them or not? So under the second point, what I'm trying to say is that if we try to have, say, stronger links between graduation and inclusive growth, we need to look at this. And I do agree fully with, echoing what Imran mentioned. Yes, we do need targeting, and within this targeting, innovations are really important. From the poll, you have seen that targeting is one of the key areas identified by the participants. So that means perhaps this is also our time to look into that. Shall we need a graduation plus a kind of approach to incorporate, to integrate leaving no one behind principle fully, to make it sure that graduation approach is contributing to inclusive growth. Based on the first 2 points, what I just shared, now here comes the issues related to collaboration and cooperation. Considering country situations like Bangladesh, we know that as of now, forget about COVID. Other than COVID, we do have, say, 10.5% of extreme poor people. The pace, say, the program, the kind of development programs we will have, that is not enough to say address the entire poverty reduction issues here, to make the entire country say there is no extreme poor people. That requires a different pace, and that requires the cooperation. And cooperation in what form? It's not a new thing. The way I would like to put it, we need to find out new entry points and that the collaboration points. Many times what I have seen is that, and very often is that, there is always a competition. And somehow, if you consider the development programs at the local level, it's a kind of a market, and I see a competition there. I think we need government's stronger role there to make it from competition to cooperation, and creating entry points. And one of the entry or many entry points could be, as I mentioned in my first two, say the new working on the new form of social protection. And second is focusing on the leaving one behind. And Imran Bhai also touched the innovation and to some extent intergenerational. My fourth point, and this is my last point, is about the political willingness. Stephanie touched that, and we have seen it in the book. And also within the political willingness, I'd like to see, we need to really work on that, have something in place, a forward-looking political economy analysis, which is a critical thing in my view, and which covers many issues. One, the resource allocation and utilization of resources. I think our participants here, they have identified that's one of the most, I think the most one. And that is what's happening in Bangladesh. It's not that we don't have resources at the local level. We do have resources, but the leakage is there. Is so important that we need to address this right now. If we can address that leakages, I think much more resources we will have in our hands through collaboration and cooperation. We can direct it towards, say, addressing extreme poverty, inequality, inclusive growth through graduation approach. The second is that I think these are much more bigger macroeconomic questions, what Stephanie mentioned, and that requires like much more studies at the national level. Imran Bhai has also touched, mainly focusing on rate of return. I mean, whatever we are doing right now, if those are the investments, how those are going to give us back, say like, in 4 to 5 years time, that kind of approach, political economy approach, we need to put forward. I will stop here, Wendy. These are the 4 questions, and later on, if there are other questions I can respond to.
Thank you, Palash. A very comprehensive set of interesting points on the new kinds of programs and systems needed, on the need to make stronger linkages between graduation programs and inclusive growth, on the utter importance of collaboration and coordination, and then also forward-looking more on the political economy questions and prioritization, which I think is a great segue then to Pak Maliki in Indonesia and from the Ministry of Planning. Pak Maliki, drawing from your experience in Indonesia, what changes do you think should be prioritized to help make policies and programs more inclusive, expansive, and evidence-based so that they better serve people living in extreme poverty? Over to you, Maliki.
Okay, thank you, Wendy. First, I would like to thank for BRAC for inviting me to speak in this event. It's very honor for me. And also it's an opportunity for me to learn also from the other countries and also from the conceptual system of this social protections. Answer to your questions, Wendy. Maybe I'll start with our experience during the pandemic of it. Right before the pandemic, our president instructed 2 things. One is fix our data, which we have actually by name by address data that managed by the Ministry of Social Affairs. And the second one is to accelerate our zero extreme poverty target to 2024. Which is 6 years earlier than our SDGs target. So meaning that we really need to have some extraordinary effort to achieve this instruction. And then right after that, we have pandemic. We start to have like the first case in March, and then this is a beginning actually our interventions of the social assistance to the pandemic COVID, and during the pandemic COVID, we quite extensively intervened with the social assistance, and almost everybody, every line almost a lot of line ministers intervened this one. And the coverage of the social assistance during the pandemic COVID is almost like 60% of the population. But then the challenge came because the data is still not quite valid yet, and not everybody like hold the same data. So this is a quite challenge, and also like 60%, there's a lot of like overlap, also a lot of exclusion and also inclusions errors in this case. And we also, in the same time, we have also to formulate how the extreme poverty have to be zero in like in the coming years, you know. So this is quite like conceptually and then academically and also the politically, we have to answers in our approach, policy approach. So we need to, and that we came up with the policy, which is we have like the social protection reform, And one of the social protection reform requirement is that we have to transform our data. Currently, we have data, by name by address data, covering like 40% of the populations. And this one is the 40% of the poorest. And our data is still not systematically updated by the local government and also line ministers. So then we don't really exactly know how actually the situations during the pandemic COVID. With this social protection reform, we take the actions that this data have to be transformed into a social economic registry, which covering like 100% of the population. And we also have to improve the capability of the local government to update the data and strengthening their fiscal capacity to do it, as well as on how we can build the institutional institutional arrangements within the line ministers to manage this data. Why we have to cover like 100% of the population? Learning from the experience in pandemic COVID, all these like shocks, whether it is like a natural shocks, climate change shocks, as well as like the social shocks, I think it's not only like the poor and vulnerable affect to these shocks, but also like almost like a 60% or even like the middle class are affected by the shock. And in addition to that, there is a lot of like groups that is invisible, which is like haven't been in our data earlier. And it is always excluded in our social protections programs. Mainly, there are like women who is become like the household head of the family, and then informal sectors, people with disability, as well as I think the family with the elderly. Yeah. So this is the one that always like excluded in the almost excluded in the social protection reform. So these are then our transformations from the data into like socio-economic registry is expected to cover all the populations, including the whole vulnerable people. And we also have to develop a systematic way on how we can find them. We can make them into our database. This is still quite like very early, and we are still have a challenge in how to coordinate with a lot of line ministers that actually also manage the same data. And then the second one is integrations. Yeah, integration of the programs, because our social protection have to carry the principles of the like a complete complementary. Social assistance, not only by the Ministry of Social Affairs, but also with the Ministry of Education, Ministry of Villages, Ministry of says like manpower, and I think we can name almost like 5 to 10 like line ministers carrying social assistance, both with their own function like health, educations, maybe also food, food assistance and everything. So in this case, that we have to make sure that the beneficiaries of the social assistance, especially for the extreme poor, have to receive all of this assistance, like food, and then LPG, electricity, education, as well as the health. So then we cannot like integrate the I mean, all of the line ministers have to integrate all the programs and also converging into one of the converging into the same targeting system that have to be have to be implemented by the same data ownership. Yeah. So the interoperable between the programs in social protections is become essential to provide more efficient, effective, and also individual service delivery. And then later on, after we are already interfere with the social assistance program, we have to make sure that we also integrate with the economic empowerment. That have to be assessed very carefully, especially in the local level. What kind of economic empowerment actually can be developed sustainably in that in the regions level. So that's at least three strategy that we have to ensure to make all the coverage of the social assistance become more inclusive. And then also we can eradicate the extreme poverty. I think if we can't manage to have like a more accurate data and then more widespread coverage data to the whole populations, including the whole vulnerable people, it will make ensure that the integration of the programs will be strong, and every line ministers will also comply with on how they can fulfill the whole basic needs of the targeted people, and then also we have to make sure that the empowerment is also sustainable. Lastly, we also with the whole like transformation of our data, we just also want to make sure that the social protection is more adaptive to the natural shocks, that which is actually very common to Indonesia. So that's Wendy. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Maliki, for that excellent overview of the kinds of changes and challenges that have happened with the COVID pandemic and the kind of response in terms of very strong focus on data and accelerating data collection, but also improving the quality of data, and also a very strong effort on integration of programs, particularly looking at the continuation between cash transfer programs and economic empowerment programs and the integration of both. And finally, the transformation of data and the need and the effort to focus a little bit more on social protection adaptive programs going forward. So now I would like to switch to our final panelist this evening, which is Swamin. And I would also like to encourage, just before asking this question, anybody to please put your questions in the chat so that we can pick up some of that in the next round of discussion going forward. So finally, Swamin, from your perspective and looking at experience from across the region and globally, how can governments, multilateral institutions, funders, academics, and civil society work together more collaboratively and effectively to apply evidence to eradicate extreme poverty and drive systems change? In almost every speaker today, we've heard about the need for collaboration and coordination, and that being one of the key challenges. So over to you, Swamin.
Thank you, Wendy. So let me make 3 points on this issue of broad partnership and the relative role of various stakeholders in this fight against extreme poverty. The first point to make is really that I think there's a fairly logical division of labor and an established sort of understanding of the comparative advantage of each of these stakeholders, right? So on the multilateral institutions, the IFIs in particular have been very good with funding. The UN-related institutions have been pretty good with norm setting. And together, all the international multilateral institutions have been very good with cross-national learning. Now, governments, that's where the action is. That's where they are responsible for key policies and programs. The theater of action is indeed where, all this, they're accountable for results there. That's how governments garner legitimacy by showing results in these areas. Researchers have been pretty good in collecting evidence, as we've heard from previous speakers today, generating evidence through peer-reviewed journal articles or other publications. This has been fairly well done. And civil society, we find, have been pretty good at monitoring of activities, assessing of progress, and basically acting as watchdogs in this area. The second point to make is, I think there's, over the last 50 years, there's been a pretty strong two-way learning between both the multilateral institutions and governments. So multilateral institutions like the World Bank, like the Asian Development Bank, have been very good at garnering evidence and promoting policies aimed at generating economic growth, the emphasis on trade, on foreign direct investment, on technology transfer, on business climate reforms, both at the micro and the macro. That's really been their focus, and they've been very good at it. The other multilateral institutions like the UN have tended to focus more on the equity and the sustainability aspects of things. So again, on setting standards, setting norms. The Millennium Development Goals were a good start. Now we're in this era of SDGs, which is again, rallying the whole world around these common minimum development aspirations. The interesting point here to make here is actually that many of the international agencies have also learned from the government. So it's not just a one-way traffic, right? And this is where the successful countries at reducing poverty in large numbers have often followed quite original development strategies, quite unorthodox or even heterodox reforms that have taught the academic community, the international organizations, on what might actually work in certain circumstances. China and Vietnam have taught the world how to do agriculture sector reforms, how to do township village enterprise reforms, how to handle sequence foreign direct investment. Countries like Bangladesh have taught us about the importance of basic public service delivery, microfinance, export-oriented, labor-intensive manufacturers, female empowerment, etc. India is showing us right now the importance of large-scale employment guarantee schemes, large-scale health insurance schemes, large-scale financial access to financial services. So this two-way learning process, I think, is something to be recognized. And academics and civil society have often played an important role in validating this process of learning and dissemination. The final point I'd like to make is, so while this tripartite collaboration between international institutions, between national governments, between academia and civil society has worked generally, we need to consolidate and broaden this partnership some more, because the challenges are also becoming much more complex. As the cliche goes, we're going from the challenge of billions to trillions. This jump from the MDGs to the SDGs has suddenly made our development aspirations much more ambitious, but much more complex. So in broadening this partnership, I think we didn't mention the private sector, and this is what I would end with. I think they need to be on the table now for the set of challenges that we need to meet. They should be there investing, but also helping shape policies that incentivize private sector action to solve many of the challenges going forward. This is on equity, this is on climate change, this is on digitalization, this is on enhancing state capabilities, and a host of other challenges. So let me stop there, Wendy.
Okay, thank you. That was a very interesting and intriguing final point on the role of private sector and their involvement and opportunity to engage in policy discussion and investment to help to push push in the directions that you were just speaking about, and very importantly, the two-way learning process, and also the division of labor and comparative advantage among the different stakeholders, and the way in which they can maybe work a little bit better going forward, and better coordinated, and better sequencing of intervention and assistance to one another. So thank you. That was a really riveting and very interesting first round of questions to everybody. I again would like to encourage anybody in the audience to add your questions, if you would like, to the chat, and we'll try to pick them up. But to maybe kick off this second round, let's do a quick view of, let's do a quick take on your view about how to design the future. I'll give you each about 2-3 minutes to tell us what you think is most needed, what intervention, what policy lever, what implementation tweak, what evidence focus, for example, to further advance efforts to eradicate extreme poverty and ensure those furthest behind are also included. So shall we go in the same sequence as before? I'll kick off with you, Stephanie.
Excuse me, Wendy, now this is when the 3 a.m. starts kicking.
Yeah,
Sorry,
okay.
can you please just ask me this question again?
Okay. Yes, I will, and apologies. Okay, so let's take a quick take on your view of how to design the future. Tell us what you think is most needed, what intervention or what policy lever or what implementation tweak or what evidence case to further advance efforts to eradicate extreme poverty and ensure those furthest behind are included. Basically, what is 1 or 2 things that are really needed to gain, to gather momentum and to really affect change in countries and in social protection systems? Thank you.
Yes, if I knew the answer to this question, I think it will be better than winning the lottery. Really, it's such a large question. What I can say is that as a researcher, I think that rigorous and honest the second thing that I would like to maybe comment about relates to a lot of what you have all mentioned today, or all talked about, which is political support. I have found that when I worked with policymakers, respect for the local constraints, respect for the environment in which they work is essential. A really good understanding of where we were. I'm talking as a researcher now, so I'm sorry, maybe this is a narrow view again, as I did before. From where I stand, we need the kind of evidence that I aim to produce. And I think in order for it to be helpful and to really fill this role of informing policy, I think that you need respect and you need trust. You need to gain the trust of the government that you work with, of the partners that you work with. I'm a very big believer of those two elements that enable my role as a researcher to inform policy. So in the case of Cambodia, for example, I've been working since 2006 with them, with many different stakeholders within the government, different government officials in different ministries. And I've always tried to answer the need that they had. I always try to make my research really designed to answer the question that they had for me, whether it's about growth, whether it's about social protection, whether it's about public investment. So yes, good quality research that is honest, that understands the local context well, and a working relationship with the main stakeholders that respect the local constraint, doesn't try to impose an agenda on them. I think as a researcher, this is more easy for me because I do not have an agenda. And I think this is something that has helped me doing my work as well. And the trust. So, and in terms, if I had to choose one area in which I think, as a researcher, we need to know more of, it will be behavioral economics. What I'm doing now is trying to integrate this into my work more precisely, understanding the behavior of the participants of the program, why they decide to take the decision they take in some context and why they do not in others, is really something that I believe is a next step. For me, it's a next step forward. And this is what I really, really would like to work on. Does that answer your question, Wendy, or is it,
Yes,
again,
no, it's a very big question. It's really, what is the agenda for the future? What do you think will be, help to make change and build towards a better future? So thank you very much, Stephanie. That was a great answer. Imran, I give you also this very big bucket and view to the future, some of which you already touched upon, and ask you what would be the priorities on your side.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think, like Stephanie, I come broadly, from the world of, evidence and between evidence and practice. So I'll try and reflect from that perspective. So I think I fully agree with what Stephanie is saying. But, the way I would basically frame it is that, evidence to be able for it to be able to influence policy and practice or systems, it needs to take politics seriously. And I think that really often is the missing link. And by politics, I don't mean partisan politics. I mean the political choices and the political constraints. And that is the heart of any public policy. And we have in some ways apoliticized evidence to policy conversations. And I think, we need to bring back politics into the way we think about evidence and the way we think about how to use evidence to sort of create system change. And I think that is a big agenda. And I think I think the graduation program is a sort of, or the graduation approach is a sort of a great platform to do that, because if you want this to be a system change agenda, we have to take the political choices of the government, political priorities, the political psychology of the government extremely seriously. And it's really interesting when you looked at, when we looked at, what in the poll, in the polls that we just now basically had, and I mentioned this in the chat. I mean, what came out very clearly is, the constraint that people feel, at least in Asia, to be the least, kind of binding, is the transition in government. And that is really interesting, right? For this agenda, it seems the transition in government is not the overriding constraint in terms of moving this forward, right? So this can be a real entry point then, but we need to understand the different governmentality in different contexts to be able to think about, what the entry point there are and what the evidential question and process should be, right? And I think so. I've been a bit abstract here, but I think that's really, we need to kind of bring politics back to really think about evidence to inform system change. And I think graduation approach and the kind of evidence that we have built can be a very good platform for that, but that will require us to be bolder. It will require us to take a bit of risk at times, and also form new partnerships. And I think that really is important as well. I think the evidence world is also becoming extremely self-referential and extremely homogeneous. And I think we need to really really think very creatively about how do we create new forms of partnership to sort of generate kind of much more exciting forms of evidence that takes politics seriously. We need to work with political scientists, data scientists, anthropologists, that whole I think landscape needs to be looked at with that richness.
Okay, thank you very much. That's also an exciting way forward. Palash, over to you. Where do you think things should be heading?
Oh, thanks, Wendy. I'll not be repeating what Stephanie and Imran mentioned, but I'd like to re-emphasize some of the points what I shared earlier and what we are doing at BRAC. The first is that for any country like Bangladesh, for any developing country, considering the current situation, it's so important to focus on the new challenges we are facing. We talked about climate change. We know about urbanization. We know about, say, the COVID-19 and the new poor situation. But what we are doing with that? I mean, what we are saying is that, be it multilaterals, be it government, be it NGOs, we are trying to basically respond to some of the needs. But if it is about policy, it's time to basically bring all of them together. And at the same time, the policy formulation, that takes time. But that should not stop us doing our work. And from BRAC, what we are doing in Bangladesh, we already started working last 2.5 years, almost more than a year, the graduation approach, which has created so much evidence, what that would look like when we include, say, people with who are differently able. So we are working on, say, we have piloted, we are working on that disability inclusive graduation approach. At the same time, we are testing right now, piloting climate change inclusive graduation approach. We are working on, like, how the graduation approach would look like when, say, like, in an urban setup, in urban context. That is what we are doing right now. I think it's time basically from multilaterals, from government, to bring all of us together and putting it together into policy formulation process. And that requires what Stephanie and Imran mentioned, a strong political support, for sure. Second is that, in my view, if this is the situation right now, as I mentioned earlier, certainly we do need to work on our social protection structures and the systems. The system and structures what we have developed 10, 12 years back, that's not going to work after 5 years. I mean, I was fully part of that social protection system, development of the social protection strategy in Bangladesh. But now I see, when I look back it's not going to work. We need to basically look at the whole thing differently, based on the findings, based on the piloting and testing and the evidences, what we are doing right now. That's the second thing I would really like to put on the table. The third is that I think very often what we do miss the key actors, the real actors. And to me, they are the government officials and the local actors at the local level. Local government institutions who are really delivering all of these to enter country. I think when you talk about the policy formulation, when you talk about the program design, we do miss them. I mean, I know that, based on my experiences working in many countries with many governments, it's like all the design, they are doing it like at the national level, but it's not that they are not taking information inputs, but a consultative process. It's not happening. And that there we do need, say, strong political commitment to involving actors from the local level, involving, say, all of these persons from local government institutions, at the same time also NGOs like us who are active in many parts of Bangladesh, in other countries too. So that's involvement is required. At the same time, I'd like to say also, I think Swamin touched that point, the private sector. The way we know the private sector is not big corporations and the groups and others. Think about a country like Bangladesh, Cambodia, and any African developing country. We are seeing lots of so it's like booming, that the informal economy, and we are seeing different actors. Yes, economic growth has been helping them to be part of this local economy, but the way the informal, their activation or their participation in the local economy is happening, who is going to capture that? How that is going to be captured? I think that requires a serious thought right now. And I think Imran Bhai touched that point, like, say more and more people are coming in the labor market. We do see like, occupational, different kind of occupational kind of, involvements. So those kind of things also should be, say, like, put under the broader social protection framework. So putting everything together is basically what I'd like to say. We need to do more piloting and testing. Government needs to put us back in the, bring everyone together in the policy formulations, forward looking. And second, third is that, like, involve local actors more and more. I will stop here, Wendy.
Okay, thank you very much, Palash. Same big question over to you, Maliki. Any which way you would like to take it? What you're thinking about for the future, where the priorities should be? Thank you.
Thank you, Wendy. Actually, I already discussed about the social protection reform that become our priority in the next 3 years until our cabinet ended in 2024. The ultimate goals of the social protection reform is that we are covering the whole vulnerable people for the assistance or the protections of from the shocks. But the visions, actually, these social protections underlie with closing the gap, between the conceptual and also the implementations, because that one, the whole is actually the conceptual framework that we shape and also we made in our policy report. But then the challenge is on how we can implement it. What we see is that we have to work together for among the central government and also the local government. This is not only the effort of the central, but also the local government. Even in the line ministers in the central government, we have to have like converging visions among the line ministers. So then we have like a quite strong integration between the whole assistance that performed by the or implemented by the whole line ministers that are relevant. So, and also they have to work by the evidence-based. So it's not only like merely just to give away the social assistance, but what actually they need. This is the one that we have to make sure is right. Is right and efficient, performed. But then, if we are talking about how it will be implemented in at the local level, then we have to think about the capacity of the local government. From our condition is from the provincial to even like to the village government. So if says that we are talking about the graduations, because you know that we cannot like assist the poor people the whole times, So then we have to think about the empowering. But then we have also to know how actually the local government identify the beneficiaries and how to identify when they have to recommend these beneficiaries to be ended by the social assistance, and keep empowering, not only like with the same scale, but also we have to empowering them with like accelerating and also increasing scale of this economic of these people. So this is the one that I think my vision is that we have to run this social protections by empowering the local government, the village government, especially with again the data collection, and then the data management, and also how they can use the data for their evidence-based planning system. So so then that they can have more strategic planning ahead. And also it's have to be related and also integrated, coordinated, coherence with the planning above them, the village level to the district level, sub-district, district, and also provincial and the nation level. So we are talking about the whole planning system and also the whole targeting systems. In this case, we are trying to empower the local government by giving them capacity on assessing the conditions, especially the why their peoples along local in their communities are poor. What is the causes of the poor, and how we can empower them. So in this case, they have to they can formulate the strategy on how to solve them, as well as we have to build how they can also propose what kind of policy that they cannot handle it, at the village level. So they have to propose it to the district level, to the provincial level, as well as the central government. So this case, we are making sure that the whole planning and also implementation is coherent. And the last thing is that by developing the social registry, we also have to ensure that the whole populations, especially the poorest, the vulnerable, are included in the database. And also we have to know exactly what actually their problems and how we can solve these problems together. That's I think that's from me, Wendy. Thank you.
Thank you, Pramaliki. And finally, with you, Swamin, any final thoughts, especially priorities for the future? Thank you.
Let me just highlight, I think we need to do a better job with the science of delivery for the last mile, right? So I think that's something that I would emphasize. The share of the global population living in extreme poverty now is less than 10%. So in absolute terms, in terms of headcount, it's less than 700 million people, and half of them live in just 5 countries, right? So it's India and Bangladesh in South Asia, and Nigeria, DRC, and Ethiopia in sub-Saharan Africa. So we know their location, we sort of understand their character, and we need to identify the most binding constraint and work to relieve it. Is it technology? Is it trade or access to markets? Is it agriculture and land reform? Is it disaster risk reduction and sort of insurance mechanisms? So we just have to intervene and get on with this mission of making poverty history this decade. So this science of delivery for the last mile, I think this is something I would emphasize. Thanks.
Thank you. I think that's a great closing. I want to lift up one of these questions, at least one question. We just have a couple of minutes left, and maybe direct it directly to Imran and Palash, who both brought it up in their comments. Pankaj Kumar is asked, is there any feedback on how extreme poverty eradication can be linked with climate change for the future? Almost all of you have raised this as a major issue, so I can start open to anybody to answer, but I remember some of this was alluded to in Imran and Palash. Over to you, please. Just one minute each, please. Thanks.
Well, let me start. I think since we are doing some piloting and testing right now, addressing the climate inclusive graduation approach, it's pretty much like, I mean, people, colleagues who are aware of like whole graduation approach, it has 4 pillars. So what we are doing right now, when we are doing the targeting, when you are doing the livelihoods promotion, when you are doing the financial inclusion, we are basically seeing everything through climate change lens. That what sort of livelihoods promotions will address the resilience issues, will address say, like the frequency of disasters, and how can we make it like much more sustainable, considering the future effects from the climate change. So having said that, we know that we have to do it, but will there be a program which can address both? In my observation is that yes, we can at the community level, but the moment say the climate change effects, it goes beyond household level and goes beyond community levels, there we do require the support from say big multilaterals in the government. the sum of the the loss, which what cannot be done by the community. So you may eradicate poverty at the household level, to some extent at the community level, but if the impact is much more higher than that, we cannot. So that it is automatically linked with the sum of the issues, say, related to public investment, say, on the infrastructure, investments on other issues like, perhaps health, perhaps education, and perhaps the support system, response systems. So yes, short term, yes, but long term, we need to sit together and work towards developing it. Wendy, you are mute.
Thank you. Any comment from anybody else? The question is, any feedback on how extreme poverty eradication can be linked with climate change for the future?
Can I just one thing to add? I mean, I think Polash said very clearly. I think it's sort of, there are things that one could do at the at the sort of micro household level, of course. By making the whole program in terms of the assets that are being provided and the technical support that's being provided to be more climate sensitive. But I think that will not be adequate, because this would require a higher level of interventions. Just household level intervention would not do. Any climate sensitive or climate smart solutions would require some element of collective action at some higher level, and that I think organizations like BRAC can do a lot at the community level. I think there are lots of community level interventions that can be very helpful and very useful in terms of promoting certain types of technologies, the uptake of certain types of climate sensitive solutions, climate smart solutions. I think there a lot BRAC type of organizations can do. And let's not forget, BRAC type of organizations in Bangladesh also created new value chains, new supply chains, in earlier era, be it in the sector of poultry or agriculture. I think similar type of models can be thought through, but of course in the new for this new challenge, this would require other types of partnership with the private sector, and the state will have to play a role. So I think that's what we really basically need. But I just want to raise one other very important point here, which has got to do with the urban. So this is all about kind of focusing on climate change at the source. But a lot of the climate migrants move primarily to secondary cities, which cities themselves are vulnerable to climate change. So they don't all come to Dhaka. I'm talking about Bangladesh. They don't all come to the main capital city. They actually go immediately to the nearby city centers, which themselves are climate vulnerable. And even when they come to cities like Dhaka and others, and we've seen this in the context of COVID, that reverse migration has happened, but the most vulnerable remain to be in this urban low-income settlements, who don't really, and the climate migrants who don't really have anything to go back to. So the climate migrants, and how do you work with city governments to prepare them better to deal with climate migration in a more systematic way, I think is another big agenda that we need to think about.
Okay, thank you, and couldn't agree more. So it's been
make a very, very brief point just
sure.
to comment on this as well. No, I fully agree with what's been said, and the fact that adaptation and mitigation of the climate change risk are essential. Lessons we can get from the COVID experience in relation to climate change mitigation is that social protection protected part of the economy that was healthy from the shock. So social protection is in fact, in a way, and graduation, of course, part of this, prevent the propagation of the shock to the healthy part of the economy. This was true for COVID. It is very likely to be true for climate change. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Stephanie. Excellent.
Hanya tidak mungkin teman-teman belum
Excellent,
aware.
excellent way to conclude. So we've really come to right to the very, very end, and I thank all of the panelists for a very stimulating and rich discussion, full of examples of programs and evidence-based approaches, and your views on how to take the next steps and build a strengthened set of programs and policies for the future. I'm glad we ended on this topic of climate change, really looking towards the future. So let me now hand over for the closing of the session to Greg Chen. And just before that, I'd like to request that you fill out the post-webinar survey that will pop up on your screen at the end of the session. Thank you very much, and a wonderful discussion. Over to Greg. Thank you.
Yeah, Wendy, really big thanks for your able and sort of nimble moderation throughout. It really kept it very lively. And I learned a lot listening in here, and I don't have anything more to add except a big thank you to all the panelists and all the people who could join and all of our partners who helped pull this together. I think there was a rich discussion, and it certainly gives lots of ideas and content that we should take into our next discussion, and more importantly, to take into action in all the countries that we care about in Asia. So thanks very much. And good day, good night, and wherever you may be listening in and watching. Thank you.
Thank you.